Hello and welcome to Code with Sar. I'm Sar. How are you doing today? Today we're going to talk about custom dialog in Android. But before that, I got a comment that my speaking is too fast with accent. I appreciate the comment. I'm going to do some tweaking, and please leave a comment to let me know if this becomes better or worse. Now, let's talk about custom dialog. What I am going to share with you today are the lessons that I learned when I tried to build the dialog for CodeNameK on Android. I am myself a professional developer for PC, but I'm building a Xamarin application that runs on Android. So this is us learning it together. So I'm going to focus on the differences from my observation. Let's get started. Dialog is a standard component on Android. By digging online a little bit, we're going to quickly come across this DialogBuilder API. What I'm going to show you next is probably a very first caveat for PC developers, and I'll explain more when we start to run the code. But for now, everything seems to make sense. It allows us to set a title, a piece of message, and we could set 3 buttons at the most for their text, as well as the handlers. When we finish the customization, then we call show method, and we will see a pop-up dialog with the customized title and the message. So what is a caveat? Let's try flip the phone. Notice the dialog is gone. Let's try that again. Bring up the dialog, flip the phone, and it disappeared again. So the problem is the dialog would disappear at the time the user is not expected. And the reason behind that was that when a phone gets flipped, there were a lot of things happened. The current activity almost experienced a full life cycle. Now, activity lifetime by itself could well be a topic. I'm planning to have another video for that. For now, let's focus on how to build a dialog that actually works. Here, I am going to show you the correct way. Okay, one of the correct way to build a dialog. The first step is to create a class. I named it Add Category Dialog Fragment. This class needs to inherit from dialog fragment, and there are 2 of them. One in the namespace of Android.app, another in AndroidX.Fragment.app. This same class coming down from different libraries within different namespace. That confuses me for quite a while, until I figured, 1, this is kind of common in Android world for the sake of backward compatibility. Second, many of those classes would have been obsoleted or deprecated, and it is important for us to understand how to find the latest greatest package. I find it very useful to go to the Android developers documentation and search for the class. For any deprecated API, there is usually a very obvious warning area, like it here for dialog fragment. On the left-hand side, we can find out which class does this really comes down from. And then usually there's a link to the neural API In our case, we're going to use Android.X.Fragment.app.DialogFragment. And if you have a better way to find out this kind of information, please share it in the comment below. Now, let's get back to the code. Once we decided the base class, the first thing for us to do is to override this method onCreateDialog. What we need to do here is then to call the AlertDialog.Builder, just like what we did while we were in the activity. I just imported a wrong namespace by accident. As you can see, this same class name from different namespaces is all around the places. I'm just going to finish setting up the dialog by message and title. A positive button. Here, I'll leave an empty event handler for the positive button for now. We'll get back to it later. When the configuration for the builder is ready, we're going to call the create method and return the result. Now, let's get back to the activity. Instead of calling the dialog builder directly, we're going to call the class we just created, add category dialog fragment. Here on the show method, we need to provide a FragmentManager, and we could get it from the property of support FragmentManager directly from an activity. Oh, by the way, the current activity inherits kActivityBase, which inherits AppCompact activity, and it is actually AppCompact activity that is applying this support FragmentManager. Let's get the code up and running. Pop up. Flip the phone. This is still there. Let's try that again. Still works. Perfect. Now we have a dialog that works with different lifetime events. Let's take a look at how to hook up the button clicks. When we firstly built the dialog, it was very easy to get the click event handlers because all the code were in the activity. But now, the dialog builder code is moved to the dialog fragment. There is a little bit effort that is needed to make the click event handler work. What I'm going to share with you next is what I did when I initially tried to hook it up. The code makes sense, and it will run well at the very beginning, but it will crash the whole application. Let's see how is damage done. Essentially, I want to give a piece of code, a delegate, to the add category dialog fragment. What I'm doing here is pass it on to the constructor of the add category dialog fragment. When the delegate is called, it will write log information of OK is clicked. Now, since this delegate is in the activity, if we could see the log entry, we could use the same code spot to manipulate stuff in the activity. Makes sense, right? So let's update the code in the dialog fragment. Firstly, let's add a constructor that takes in an action. I'll call it onOKClicked. And then assign this delegate to a field. Now when the positive button is clicked, we invoke it. Now the code is ready for testing. Let's deploy it and try it out. It's up and running. Let's click the button and flip the phone. Oops, it crashed. Let's try that again. flip the phone, and another crash. What a nightmare. Our newly deployed application, upon flip, crashed. What can we do? This is actually something that I want to show you. How to find out what crashed the app in Logcat. Let's bring up the UI for logs. There's tons of information here. What we are looking for is unhandled exception, ideally with proper call stack as well. Something looks like this. The Logcat viewer actually is not very good to represent the text. Let's copy and paste it out to a notepad and see what's the error message. This one says, unable to find the default constructor for type app category dialog fragment. Oh, of course, we just updated the constructor to take in action, and that removed the default constructor, which is a parameterless one, and that is the direct cause of the crash. Now, my quick react would be add the default constructor back. But hold on, let's just think. Why? Let's pay attention to line 87. There is a support FragmentManager. We are leveraging that to help us manage the lifecycle of a dialog. Plus, we know by flipping the phone, the dialog would be unload and reload. Upon reloading, it is the FragmentManager's responsibility to recreate the dialog that is on the screen. It is also the FragmentManager that calls the default constructor of the fragment. So if we simply add back the default constructor to the side of the constructor that we have today, it leads us to a situation where click would work for the first time before unloading, thanks to the line 85 that calls the non-default constructor. But then, after unload and reload, when the default constructor is called, the delegate to respond to button click will become null, and that's another defect. Based on that, that's probably not the correct fix. So what is then? Well, the first thing, let's restore the default constructor and make it the only one. And then I'm going to share with you another way to hook up the click events. The first thing is to create an interface for the listeners. I am putting the interface here along with the class to help me describe the relationship between the class and the interface. I still recommend to put the interfaces in their own files. For now, let's go along with it. So what does a listener do? It listens to the button clicks. For example, on OK clicked. In our case, think with me, who would be the one to listen to the change? Would it be the fragment, or would it be the activity? It's the activity that's going to listen to the click, right? Let's update the category list activity to implement addCategoryDialogListener, and I'll just leverage the IDE to generate the method. Again, this category list activity is listening to the OK click, and when that happens, we're going to output a log entry of OK button is clicked. Now we have the listener. We need to hook it up to the component that emits the event. To do that, we need to go back to the dialog fragment and overwrite another method, OnAttach. Here's how it works. The activity got loaded first. We then tap the add button. The dialog fragment then be constructed, and it will be attached to the activity. Notice the activity happened to be the listener for the events. And that is where we saved it to a field. For example, underscore listener. Then, when a click actually happens, we're going to invoke the onOKClicked method on the listener. And we could do a little bit of cleanup to set the underscore listener to null upon detach. Let's try clean up the logic again. The dialog fragment get attached to an activity. The activity is a listener to the OK events. And when the event really happens, which is set by the dialog builder, it will invoke the method on the listener. So the activity will know when click happens. Okay, I think we are ready for another demo. Bring up the add dialog. Flip the phone. So far, so good. Let's click the OK. And we need to see if the OK button is actually hooked up. Let me bring up the Logcat. Here we go. OK button is clicked. Do it again. And it works. Now we know how to build a dialog properly. Let's see how to customize it, so that not only can it show a message, it will also take in user inputs. To build such a dialog, we need to create an Android layout first. An Android layout is a resource in the form of XML. It is used to define UI representation. Within a layout file, it is common to see some layout and various widgets. If you are familiar with the WPF or UWP, I think you will quickly compare this to XAML. They are very similar, except XAML is treated as a partial class. It's always compiled, and the controls in XAML would directly be mapped to properties, while layout is just a resource. It could be inflate into objects, but we need to write code to do that. Let's get back to the layout file. We could compare a linear layout to a stack panel. It could host a list of children in a row or in a column by orientation. Layout width decides how much space will it take horizontally, and the layout height decides the vertical space. Common values like match parent or wrap content, where match parent takes up space as much as possible, and wrap content does the opposite. We're going to make the container as wide as possible, but only space needed for the input controls, or here we call them widgets. We want the user to type in something. Edit text fits our needs. It is important for the edit text to have an ID property, because we're going to leverage it to access the value of the text edit. It took me a while to get used to this add plus ID syntax. This means add an ID resource. The key for it is edit text add category, and assign a random unique number as a value to the ID. I'll add a margin to make it look better. And let's see what's the warning. We probably missed something important. No input type specified. Oh, okay. I don't know too much about it, but I guess it decides the keyboard behavior. I'm just going to guess one that makes sense. Autocorrect looks nice. Let's move on to the next step. And we are going to insert this piece into the dialog. Actually, inflate is the correct verb here. Here in the dialog fragment, we call setView on builder. Remember I mentioned the layout is a resource. what we need to do is to pass on the resource ID. And the resource ID for a layout file is automatically compiled to resource.layout followed by the XML file name. By the way, the static class of resource is a Xamarin convention. In Java, it would be single character R. Knowing that helps me read the official Android developer document better. Coming back, let's see how it looks like. Okay, other than messages, we now have a place for text input. Next, I'll show you how to get the value of the user input from the activity. But before that, let's take a detour. I'm going to add a nice touch to the UI. And that is a hint. And in some place, this is called a watermarker. Just a small tip. Okay, how to get the value? To get the value, we need to firstly get the handle to the text edit widget we added. And to do that, we need to inflate the XML manually. So we need to access an inflator. And guess what? We have one on the DialogFragment class. It is called Layout Inflator, and we call inflate method on it. It returns a view that is built according to the layout XML. And we can give that view object to setView method. Now that we have a hold to the dialog content view, we can use a findViewById method to reach the edit text widget. Remember that wacky ID syntax? It is used here to access the widget. And I'm going to note it to a field so that it could be accessed when the user tapped the OK button. Let's do it. In the OK event handler, we get the value for the new category from the new category edit text.text property. And then we will need to update the listener to pass the value through. Here in the listener, actually the activity, let's output the new value to the log. Let's see how it runs. The edit text widget's gone, and it looks like it crashed when I click the OK button. Let's see what's going on. It is a non-reference exception. The top frame points to the onCreateDialog method in addCategoryDialogFragment. B__ is a hint for a lambda method. I probably made some mistake there. Let's get back to the code. Okay, it took me a while. I edited out the investigation, but here's the mistake. Line 35 is thrown because we are trying to access the text property of a null object. Underscore new category edit text is null because the find view by ID on line 28 returned null. And the reason for that is because I passed on the wrong resource ID on line 27 to inflate the layout. And that is because I had a typo in the file name for the layout, and the IntelliSense just switched out the ID that I didn't pay attention to. Let's fix it on the root to correct the misspelled file name. Then let's work on giving it the correct layout ID. It seems like the ID isn't there yet. Let's build the project to force the regeneration of the resource class. Well, if you are interested, crack open this resource.designer.cs file. You'll see all sorts of generated IDs. Here's our dialog content add category. It looks correct this time. And let's deploy and try it again. Good. Now we can see the edit text widget with a nice hint on it. Let's type in something like a hello world. Well, after all, I'm a developer. And at the final test, let's flip the phone in the middle. Woohoo! It survived. And let's see if hello world has been passed through. It looks like so. Let's just enjoy the moment and pass in something else. That's it, my friend. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe, leave a comment, and keep coding, keep improving. I'll see you next one. Until then, take care.